The 1904 Olympic marathon that was ruined by something unknown in St. Louis. A man crosses the finish line. He's foaming at the mouth, barely standing. The crowd goes wild. Officials hand over the medal. Everyone celebrates. Then the truth comes out. This was the 1904 Olympic marathon. And what happened that day in St. Louis wasn't bad luck. It wasn't some freak accident. It was rat poison, feral dogs, a man who spent half the race in a car, and one Cuban postman who stopped to eat apples. Every single detail is real. St. Louis, 1904. The Olympics were already a disaster before the marathon even started. The games had been tacked onto a World's Fair, almost as an afterthought. Funding was thin. Organization was thinner. The people running the event had no real model to follow. The modern Olympics were only 8 years old at this point. Nobody had figured out what they were doing yet, and the marathon was the worst of it. The course was a 24.85-mile loop through the Missouri countryside in August. That matters because August in St. Louis is brutal. Thick, wet heat that sits on your chest. The kind of heat where you walk outside and immediately regret it. On race day, temperatures hit around 90 degrees before noon. There was one water station on the entire course. One, for nearly 25 miles. That wasn't an oversight. The chief organizer, a man obsessed with studying human endurance, actually wanted to see what would happen to the runners without water. He framed it as a scientific experiment. He wanted data on dehydration, on how the body breaks down, on how far men could push before they stopped working. So he built the suffering in on purpose. The road itself was a dirt track, loose, dry, crumbling dirt, and the race had a convoy of official vehicles, cars and horses, traveling alongside the runners the entire way. Every time a vehicle moved, it kicked up a massive cloud of choking dust. Runners spent miles breathing it in, coughing, gagging, eyes burning. Now look at who was actually running. 32 men lined up at the start. Some were trained distance runners. Most weren't. There were men who had never run a marathon in their lives. There was a postman from Cuba who had arrived in St. Louis just days earlier, had no real training, and was wearing street shoes. Actual street shoes, not running shoes, the kind you wear to walk around in. There were also a handful of men from South Africa competing in their first ever Olympic event who had traveled enormous distances just to be there. One of them would later claim he'd been chased off the course by dogs. That detail sounds like an excuse. It wasn't. One man in particular is worth watching. He'd been training hard. He had real competitive experience. His trainer was traveling with him and had brought supplies, including a very specific remedy for fatigue that was considered acceptable at the time. That remedy will matter later. So, 32 men, 90-degree heat, one water stop, a dust-choked dirt road, no real safety protocols, no medical oversight worth mentioning, a chief organizer who was actively withholding water as an experiment. The gun fires. The race begins. And almost immediately, everything falls apart. Within the first few miles, the dust is already a problem. The escort vehicles move ahead, slow down, speed up, cut across the runners. Every pass leaves a thick brown cloud hanging in the air. Runners run directly through it. There's nowhere else to go. The road is the road. Men start dropping back. Some slow to a walk. The heat is pressing down on everything, and the dust is coating their throats, their lungs. A few runners begin vomiting on the side of the road before they're even halfway through. Then the dogs show up. Feral dogs had been running loose in the rural areas outside St. Louis. A few of them picked up on the commotion, the cars, the horses, the swarm of men moving through their territory, and they came out. Not one dog, a pack. They chased several runners off the course. One competitor from South Africa got cornered and lost serious time trying to get around them. He'd finish the race eventually, but the detour cost him badly. Meanwhile, somewhere on that dust-choked road, the Cuban postman, Felix Carvajal, though you wouldn't know his name from any trophy, decides he's hungry. He spots an apple orchard off the route. He stops, picks apples, eats them, takes his time about it, then gets back on the course and keeps running. In his street shoes, he'll finish fourth, despite the apple break, despite the shoes, despite having never run a marathon before arriving in St. Louis. But here's where it gets worse. One of the more experienced runners is struggling badly. The heat, the dust, the miles, it's all catching up. His trainer is watching him deteriorate in real time and makes a decision. He administers strychnine. You know strychnine as rat poison, and it is. But in small, carefully measured doses, trainers and coaches of that era used it as a stimulant. It was believed to push the body past its limits, give it one more surge when everything else was failing. He mixes it with brandy and gives it to the runner. The runner keeps going for a while. Then his body starts to fight back. He hallucinates. His stomach turns completely. He collapses by the side of the road, vomiting violently, barely conscious. His trainer doesn't pull him from the race. He waits. The runner eventually drags himself back up, gets moving again. He will cross the finish line, but he's not the first. The first man to finish is Frederick Loers. He crosses the line looking surprisingly fresh. The crowd erupts. Officials move toward him. A medal is prepared. Alice Roosevelt, daughter of President Theodore Roosevelt, poses for a photograph with him. Everyone is celebrating. What nobody knew yet, or chose to notice, was that Loers had stopped running around the 11-mile mark. His legs had given out. His manager offered him a ride in a support car. Loers accepted. He rode for approximately 11 miles. Then when the car broke down near the finish area, he got out and ran the last stretch on foot. He crossed the line. He let the crowd cheer. He stood for the photograph. He claimed later it was a joke, that he never intended to actually accept the medal, that it got out of hand. Officials didn't find it funny. Neither did anyone else. The disqualification came hours after the celebration had already started. The medal was taken back. The cheering stopped. And the man who had actually run every mile, the man who had collapsed by the roadside after being dosed with rat poison mixed with brandy, the man who had somehow gotten back up and finished, he was declared the winner. His name was Thomas Hicks. He had run the whole course, most of it barely conscious. But the story didn't end there. Thomas Hicks was carried off the course. He couldn't walk on his own. His weight had dropped dramatically during the race. Doctors examined him and said he'd come close to dying out there on that dirt road. He kept the gold medal. The man who cheated crossed the line first and lost everything. The man who nearly died from rat poison crossed the line second and won it all. The Cuban postman who stopped for apples finished fourth in street shoes, having never trained for a marathon in his life. And the feral dogs, the dust, the deliberate removal of water, none of it made headlines the way it should have. It got folded into the general chaos of the 1904 Games, which were broadly considered a failure and mostly forgotten for decades. But here's what that race actually was. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a collection of weird coincidences that happened to land on the same afternoon. Every single problem that day had a human decision behind it. Someone chose that course. Someone chose August. Someone built one water station and called it a plan. Someone decided dehydrating athletes for data was acceptable. Someone handed a trainer a bottle of strychnine and called it medicine. No oversight, no safety standards, no one accountable for any of it. The 1904 marathon didn't fail because St. Louis had bad luck. It failed because the people running it treated human beings like variables in an experiment and called it sport. That's negligence, dressed up in Olympic rings and a finishing tape. Every chaotic detail, the poison, the dogs, the car, the apples, those aren't the story. They're the symptoms. The story is that nobody was in charge and nobody thought that was a problem. Until 22 runners out of 32 never finished the race. The most chaotic marathon in Olympic history wasn't ruined by bad luck. It was designed without care, and people nearly died for it. If you want more true stories that sound impossible but aren't, subscribe. Because the past isn't boring, it's unpredictable.